Hey everybody, we're on to video 3, starting with Parker. Parker, this one's looking really good. We'll go ahead and let it play through once. I think the biggest things you need to watch out for are spacing jumps, like little weird hitches in your arc, and there are a few spots on your hips and your feet that that you need to sort of speed up the motion a little bit. So like I see a couple right here at the beginning. So right now at the beginning, it's not the beginning, it's about 3 seconds in, we see our character pick their foot up, move it across, put their foot back down, right? And that process takes almost a whole second, right, for that character to pick that up. And in that process, the character's hips also go from way up here to way down here, right? So I think you need that foot step to happen in like 5, 6, maybe 7 frames, and the foot can get to the other side and like sort of settle, like get to its landing point and settle over a longer period of time. It's not like it's got to be completely like planted and everything. It's that time that it's in the air. Like think of like we don't like balancing on one foot. It leaves us unstable. And so like that motion is usually pretty quick. It's not super quick all the time. And if you're intentionally keeping your foot up, it's, but that doesn't feel like that's what's happening. It just feels like this is drifting in between a couple of keyframes with a little more data needed on the foot and the hips. So one of the ways that I will sometimes do this, particularly on the hips, right, is if you get this really long transition between 2 keyframes, right, then that starts to feel floaty because Maya is generating a perfect curve over a long period of time and just starts feeling robotic. And so one of the things that I'll do to sort of break that up is I'll break it up into smaller lunges and flat areas, right? So instead of this long transition down, right, one of the things you could do is you could maybe have it go up a little bit first and then have it shoot down and then sort of flatten out a little bit here and then shoot down again and sort of settle or maybe even overshoot. Right? I messed up right there at the bottom, but you get the idea. Let me try that again. So like maybe it goes up a little bit, lunges down, sort of flattens out for a little while, and then lunges again and settles, right? So I mean, you may even change it around to something like that, and it's really going to depend on the necessity of what the physics would actually imply there, right? So one of the things you could do here on yours is you could have the character's foot do the step across kind of quick, and when you do that, he would have to shift his weight this way a little bit and go up onto that leg a little bit, so it would go up and over, right? So it'd be more like this direction, right? And then after that foot's on the new spot on the ground there, then it could sort of settle back down onto that foot, right? And possibly even overshoot it, right? And so if we were to draw that new arc, like right now, what that arc for the hips is looking like is something like this, right? That new arc for the hips may look something more like, right? Like a more subtle, twisting there. Let me see if I can draw it a little bit better. So maybe like up or something like that. Like play around with a couple of different ideas with how to make that motion happen. So that brings up my other comment in here, which is arcs. I think that you should play with your arcs of your character's motion and play with the spacing of individual points. So one of the things is when you start drawing, or if you put an arc tracker on the finger of the character, right, then what you should start seeing are these like swoopy, like these sorts of gestures through space, right? What is inevitably going to happen, just because there's so many controls that are affecting this, is you're going to have this swoopy line, and then out of nowhere there's going to be like a little jag, and then it goes to the swoopy line again. And what you have to do is fix that part, right? Some of that's through the graph editor, some of it's going to be just through manually putting the arm where you need it to be and cleaning up that arc. Like you do what you have to do to make it work. The areas I would recommend you track are all the areas where there's like sort of a point, right? So the tips of the fingers. In this guy's case, you could do like one of these or the nose, because all of those elements and elbows on this guy, because he's kind of it's kind of got some pointy, thin elbows, so they draw attention. All of those elements like draw our eye, like it's what we track with our eye. And so when they have a bobble in them, like when that motion is sort of like a hitch through it, then that lets us know something's wrong. So also in that curve, in that in that arc that you'll have, right? Let's say this is your arc, right? Turn on that is it the frame ticks or whatever, where you get those little tick marks on there, right, to see where each of the frames are. And look at your spacing. So what you may have is like your spacing going up through here, right, getting smaller and smaller, and then suddenly you may have this weird lunge, and then it gets small again, and then another lunge, right? And that may not be what you wanted, right? Like it may just be that this little gap in there, that little extra lunge forward, implied some extra energy after this point, right? After there, it was like something nudged it this way a little faster. And if that's not what you're intending to happen, then that means this key tick needs to be up here, right? Or maybe more like there, right? To start easing into this acceleration. And that is something that you kind of have to track on all of those extremities. I usually do the nose and the tips of the fingers at the very least, because those are big points. Now, the hard part about it is the arcing and the spacing is really just a piling up of each of these controls, right, until you get to the tip of the nose, right? And so it could just be a very small change on that control that is causing that hitch in the graph, and fixing that curve will fix it. Or it could be, like, who knows, it could be even the translation on your hips originally that's causing it. Cleaning up the arcs actually helps you clean up your graph a little bit better, because you can then go through and find all of the elements that are messed up on the graph, because they're going to result in some weird arc or hitch. In terms of I would look at the feet, find places to get the foot underneath the character quicker. Like here's one, I get that back there and get it settled so his weight can settle on it. And then keep this front foot there a little longer so it can feel like he's pushing him back, and then get it down there on the ground quickly to catch him, right? So I think it just needs another pass on the hips and feet, and then an arc cleanup pass. And I actually think you got a pretty nice piece here. Obviously, maybe beef up this render a little bit, get a little bit brighter. And my 2 cents, I would scatter some more stuff on the ground too. Those 2 blocks seem like a little overkill for the amount that he's jumping. And put like a realistic character in there. Not a realistic, but some form of, human there. And it wouldn't hurt to have sort of a breathing on it, right? So yeah, I think it's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, so we're looking at Rick. Rick has 2 of them in here, but he had said something earlier. Let me check about putting something in revisions. You did. So I'm going to go ahead and give you some feedback on that one instead. Oh, yeah, that's better. So I'll pull this over here and we'll open it in VLC. So again, Rick is going for he's in advanced 2 or advanced character animation. I think you get some cool looking stuff in this actually. I almost think that man, that's looking pretty cool. I'm gonna go through it frame by frame in here. So I think your poses are looking good. Is he? This is less of an animation question, more of a staging and rendering question. Is he rendering as gray because everything in the environment is gray? Because if so, I think he's kind of getting hidden a little bit. I think instead of just having a white sky dome out there, maybe put an HDRI on there, and that way you get some color in your lighting, you get some color in your environment to get some slightly different reflections on them. You got some great poses. You got some great stuff going on here with the contact of the feet and the settle in. And then I really like how much you're exaggerating this. I think it may be impossible, like what he's doing, like how high up he brings his knees. But I think that's what you're going for. So I think if you're going for more of an exaggerated, like cartoony look to it, there's a couple of things you strangely need to push a little more. I think you need to push his hang time just a little bit more. I think you need to clarify this pose a little bit. I think you're, even though this isn't pushing it, it's almost the opposite. I think you've rolled him too far back, and now it feels like it's a lot of centrifugal force to bring him all the way back around. Like now the sword's pointing up. I think rotating him maybe 15 degrees back up would help in this. But I think increasing your hang time up here in the air just a little bit longer, and then playing around with like how quickly he pops up there and how long he hangs there, how much he kind of continues to go up, because he looks like he kind of stops a little too much there. So maybe have him continue to like travel up a little bit, and like he's reaching that pinnacle, and then he like does this like lunge here to pull himself back down. Some of the hand placement on the sword could be a little bit better. I think maybe here the way I would probably extend his arms. I think I would get something a little bit more like these arms. That would be this next one. There we go. I would go ahead and get his arms like up this way a little bit more, and get that sword in here and bringing it forward like this, and kind of going out of the page, right? Maybe dragging it back just a little bit more, maybe a little bit more like this, right? And then the last thing, so yeah, this is looking okay. Maybe get those hands in there contacting just a touch better. The last thing is I think you hit that pose and then it ends, and that's like I need just like 15 more frames, 10 more frames, something like that, because what we're missing is the overshoot, the recoil from that impact, right? So he hits it, but then after he hits it, like I want to see like all of what that impact does to him, right? Like I mean, I think he would probably actually, in this point that it stabs in, he would probably even go lower. Like he would probably be like, way down here, like with his arms up, his head down, like really pushing down low, like, the knee up like that, right? And then kind of spring back up to this final pose, right? Like, so we get that like squish, like from the landing. So we got this stretch, and then we get him landing in a squash pose. But what we're not, I think I would push that squash and then have this be more of his like new neutral. And then I think that also, like, if you give it like 15 frames at the end, what that does is it gives us time to appreciate that impact, right? Right now the impact is happening, but as soon as it does, it's over. So it gives us a chance to let us sort of drink that in. So most of that's just settle time. It's not a lot of extra animation. It's like getting some overlapping action in there and getting your curves to sort of settle out over the frames. So that would be my only notes, man. Like, this is looking really good. I like some of your posing in here. I definitely think that sword's feeling a little light, but I think that you're doing that intentionally. To make this guy feel stronger. And I think that that you could consider making that sword not metal to sell it. Like if this thing were like a glowing like blue blade or something like that, then suddenly its weight wouldn't matter to me. Like it's like, oh, we live in a world of magic. It doesn't, you know. So I mean, you could play around with that. I like a lot of what you're getting here. I think you maybe could stretch this pose just a touch more. Like he's stretching here, that's nice. Maybe stretch him here, and then that way you get that really impact on that. But yeah, some great poses. I can, you know, you gotta watch out for the really small things, like if it goes to the floor, I kind of play around with that arc. I can, and like maybe through here, like just to get a prettier swipe. Right now, like on the arc of the sword, like it's kind of going flat right there, right? So if you carried the tip of that sword out this way just a little bit more, like out this way a little bit more, then you get a more sweeping arc, and I think that'll go into your next pose back here eventually, right? So it's like the arc of the tip of that sword from here to here could just be a little more interesting. And like you may even be able to extend it out a little bit more right there, like to where the tip of the sword is out like this, just a little bit more, right? And so really what I'm trying to do is just get that like sell those impact points. Because right now it's like this pose, I'm not sure if it's hit the object yet. This next pose, it's almost after it hit the object. So I think what I would do is I'd make this more like the pose where it hits the object, and this more like the swing past it. And I think you're going to get a little bit more impact on that. And then, yeah, I mean, like overall, it's looking really good, just pushing some of this just a touch. And if you can ever so faintly tilt the blade just so we get it a little less on this like super thin, and getting instead more of a just a little bit more of a profile view, not completely profile, but just a glint more, just so we get some depth to it. I think that would help. So awesome, great work. And so back to project 1. Sorry, I had to go with the different folder. So this is Ryan. Yeah. So, couple of small like technical things, and I'm sure we already talked about these mostly in class. You get that foot on the ground, get that block on the, or whatever this is, on the table, and you're going for the character picking it up, and we never see that moment happen. So those are some things to look at. I think right now the biggest issue with this is it feels like the extremities are doing the right things. Like the feet are in the right place, right? But it doesn't actually feel like it just feels like the torso is kind of floating along, and the feet and arms are kind of wiggling around on that. So I think you need to try to work to build it into feeling like an entire system of movement. So, for example, as this foot goes forward here, right, we need to feel that in the hips. Right? We need that hip to roll forward. Just red is a good color here. We need to feel that hip roll forward. What in the world just happened? What am I doing? Let me go back here. So yeah, see how that hip doesn't really move at all, or the lower part of the torso doesn't really move at all. So this hip, like we need to pull it forward, twist the lower part of the back a little bit to reach for it, right? And by doing that, that might change the entire shape of your spine. I think you've got the spine posed in a couple of interesting poses, but they kind of just hang out in those poses throughout most of the animation, and it starts making stuff feel stiff, right? So, for example, the spine, as he's looking around, is just kind of neutral line of action, right? And then as he grabs the object, still sort of the same line of action, right? Instead, imagine it this way. Imagine as he's looking around, like he looks to the left, right? Instead of this line of action, imagine his line of action being like this. Like he leans way over here and looks, right? And then as he looks the other way, we do the opposite of that. He leans way over here and looks, right? I recognize that, like, in early character animations, a lot of students have a tendency to not change the spine too much. And I don't know if that's being cautious or what, but it ends up leaving the spine feeling like you're kind of in a back brace. But if we get those two differences, and we go from like here to here, like look at that big like look difference. Like he goes from really looking to really looking, right? And then when he could go back to this pose, right? Or maybe even something where he's arcing back just a touch more, like he's like looking this way though, right? And then when he grabs the object, you could play around with that pose, right? Like, how does he grab that object? Does he maybe lean forward this way and continue to look to make sure nobody's paying attention, and then picks up the object? Like, there's just a lot of different things you could do, but really moving that spine around more. Now, the other things I think that similar to what I was saying with Parker's earlier. Like I can feel the key poses in this. Like I can feel like it feels like the entire character is keyed here, right? And then Maya does the work to get the character to here, right? And I want to see you having a hand in that a little bit more, right? Like you holding that foot back a little longer here. That way he's pushing off the ground, right? Maybe pushing the hips up a little bit as he takes that step. Getting the foot out here to catch him a little earlier, right? A little bit more twist, a little bit more play in the spine. It just feels like a little bit more like this is the blocking or blocking plus version. So strangely, that's not bad, because that means you can still push these poses a little bit, but it is bad because that means you still have a lot of cleanup left to do on this. So so that would be my 2 cents. You have the Maya file on here, so I may pop that open, show you some stuff to make that better, assuming I can get a little bit of extra time. So okay, let's move on to Sean. Yeah, so I think your feet, you've got some pretty good stuff kind of going on timing wise in your feet. I think you're having a little bit of what I was saying to Ryan just now about the torso being stiff, like it's like especially this head look around, like that's almost entirely in the head, and like the torso does a little bit of movement, but like it's still almost the same exact pose except for just a little bit of twist on the torso and the head, right? And like it's really hard to go to to do a 180-degree head sweep without your pose changing some. And so I think that's we think of that as like turning our head around, like if we were to put that phrase in quotes. But really what's happening is we are sort of shifting our entire pose until our head is pointed in that new direction. Right? So that is the first thing I'd say. I think you got some pretty good posing through this sneak thing. I like I like some of this. I think your feet are going a little on the even and slow side, similar to what I was talking about with Parker. Like maybe what you do is you'd hold that back there just a little longer, right? And then get it out here to catch him just a little bit earlier, right? And then the hips are kind of just doing a straight line across, if I'm not mistaken. It's kind of like you're getting a little bit of hip shift, so that's good. I think it still needs a little bit more up and down, right? So you get a little bit right there, the character goes up, but once he gets that weight there, right, and sort of that weight settles onto that front foot, then you're getting a little bit of a dip right there, right? It's just, I think it's probably pretty, like, even, and so it may instead need to be more like, hold it down here and pop it up, and then curve in, or like there may be a little bit more of a. That's not a great example. I'm trying to say, like it may pop up and then like settle and like arc in, and like there's going to be like some differences to how that curve actually works. And right now, I just feel like Maya's doing a little too much of the controlling of that. So. The biggest thing that might help this, we're not really sure what it is, just from looking at it, what it is that's surprising him. Like it's some noise, or I think you may have said like a board squeaking, or him stepping on something. And so I think we need that in there to show us the impetus. But there's a section right through here where neither of the feet are both of the feet are moving, right? And the hips are not, right? You see that? And it makes him feel like what's holding him up? Is he sitting on something and he's just kicking his feet around and we can't see that thing? So you got to keep the feet on there, or if both of the feet are coming off the ground, that's a jump, and so he needs like a little bit of a hop in his hips too. And then I think a really big way of making this stronger is just framing. Just get something like this instead, because all of the crucial information is right there. All of this stuff out here is just wasted pixels, because like none of that's giving us any information, right? You're showing it from above, which is kind of neat because that's giving him a little bit of a weakened vantage point, or isolated. And I guess you could make the argument, if he was in a giant haunted castle or something, that this would be the right framing to try to show him as isolated. But right now he's just in an empty environment, and my advice would not be to model a full environment. It would just maybe put some, if you're wanting it to be a big haunted castle, or show some reason that he's scared, then I think you could play with that a little bit. But right now there's not a ton of reason to have him this far out. I think we could zoom in there a little bit. Sort of a way I like to think of it is, if you're far away from the character, then that shot is about the environment, not about the character, right? It's about their place in that world, right? If you get closer to the character, then we start thinking more about what they're thinking. And then that shot becomes more about who that character is, or what they're worrying about, or what they're thinking about. And so in this case, you're trying to show the character is nervous, is sneaking. I would just get a little bit closer, because you're not, because it's not an environment class where we would build a scary environment to make this shot about the environment. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. Overall, I think you got some pretty good stuff in there. Just got to pull that together a little bit in terms of adding a little bit more detail in the curves. Okay, Tyler, triple attack. Yeah. Oh, it's loading slow. Let me pull this one down locally, and then drag it in. Give me just a second here as it copies. Okay, there we go. So, triple attack. So, Tyler, I would recommend watching my feedback for Rick as well, because you all have a similar piece here, and I think not similar piece, but a similar challenge you're facing. And I think some of my comments on his about like accentuating the pose would be helpful in yours as well. I think this is coming along pretty good. The biggest thing is like really selling the impact points, and so you've added those objects, and I think that's helping. It's a little confusing about where those objects are in space, like how close they are to us. I'm going to drag this in here. Let's just find the points where we can draw. Okay. So, like, well, even with our starting pose, like, I think it's a pretty good pose. But like as we said earlier, how can we push this pose, right? So some of it may be in your line of action is a little dull at the torso level, right? So right now you're kind of getting this kind of straight line. I like this leg out though, right? And so a way we could adjust that maybe sort of follow that leg and do more like this in terms of the spine. In terms of silhouette, we're also seeing like this arm is kind of hidden in the silhouette, and his arm is kind of just growing out of his chest, and then the sword is like that shape. So it starts off with us not knowing what it is that's even in his hand. So I think just tweaking this pose a little bit, maybe this elbow out like this a little bit more. All right, and then this arm, let me see if I can do this here, there. Elbow up or elbow down. So maybe something a little bit more like that. I feel like elbow up maybe makes more sense. I don't know. That's something to play around with until you get a better pose on that, right? Now I think this impact is looking okay. Again, cleaning up the silhouette just a little bit, like you get this foot over top of this foot, and eventually it goes over to here anyway. So I would just try to start reaching it in that direction earlier, right? Sort of push it over this way in this section. And then here in terms of cleaning up silhouette again, you got the sword kind of covering up a portion of the arm, right? And so maybe making that elbow go up a little bit or something like that. And down here. Looking at the curving of the spine, it doesn't really change very much through this, right? And so I think that's where you could play around, right? Maybe like right through here, if you were to arc the spine back and then really extend that arm out, right? Then after he hits, right, then you could do the opposite here. You could arc the spine further this direction, right? And so I'm really just trying to find spots where you could push it just a little bit. And maybe the other way around. Instead of arcing it back, maybe you arc it forward, right? And then you push this ball further away to have him have to reach for it out there even further, right? And that way we get this contrast between that and this. And I like this. This looks cool in terms of the spine. Only problem now is that the feet need to be a little bit more in profile, and maybe not like your entire calf is kind of disappearing, right? So just by doing a little bit of an angle on that, right, with that foot pointed out that way, you get a little bit more of that calf profile. I think that might help a little bit. So again, like this is the hard part. I mean, I think you did pretty good in the posing. Now it's finding the points to make these poses just a little bit stronger. So some areas where I'm not sure about the impact is right there. Right, it almost feels like he hits that one accidentally, And what I think you need is like this. If that's where the impact is, then put the ball out here and have him like in the sword like reaching for that one to hit it, right? That's the impact right there, right? That he has to sweep out for it. But to me, like I also wonder about that arc of the sword. So I think that you definitely need to put an arc tracker on there. And like right here, I don't know, maybe it would even work better to have the ball more out this way. That way your arc kind of sweeps out here toward us and can come back in. It definitely needs a little bit of something. So this. Let's get all the way to the end here, and then I'll sort of do my summary. But I think silhouette is important because right here, this trade-off is really confusing people. And so this may be an opportunity to switch the sword, because right now he's doing this in a weird way. It's almost like he's stabbing it into the ground, right? And what would happen if the sword just twisted in his hand to be pointed in the other way here, and then he could swipe it normally, like this way, right? Instead of in his hand upside down, it would be in his hand normally, and he would just do a regular like backhanded swipe this way, right? And then he wouldn't have to quite turn it around up here. It would already be in his hand the correct way. He would just have to spin it and grab it with the other. I wouldn't even have to spin it. He would just have to swap hands right there. So that might be a little easier. I don't know. And so here, this last impact, like again, it feels like he's swinging at something out here closer to us, right here, but he accidentally hit this thing. Right? So I think defining those points where the impact happens, and then make it look like that was intentional, right? Like the punch pose, right? If we think of a character punching, right, we get like, you know, they do this here. You know, sort of, oh goodness, sort of, you know, lean. You know, pull back to punch, right? That's terrible. Right. And then more arcing in here and get the idea. I'm just trying to sketch something out quickly. And so he pulls back to punch, right? And then your punch pose is very clear. Like the anticipation is like, I'm going to punch, right? But your punch pose has to be very like line of action, clear that, you know, there's an impact right there, right? And you get all this line of action going through to that. And that's because that impact is the most important part of the storytelling, right? Like you really got to get that punch in there. I don't think that those impacts are the stronger poses. Like those impacts are like almost in-betweens. And so I think you need to make those impacts strong poses where we read it as an impact. Having said all of that feedback is how to make it stronger. It's working like it is. Like it plays like it is, and I think we read it and kind of understand. We maybe miss with the hand switch, right? But I'm impressed with the footwork, all that stuff. You got your timing on that, and you got some good poses in here. I think right now it's really about making all of the poses good poses, and making some of the poses like excellent poses, right? So some of the good poses you have, like pushing those anyway, even if they're good, still keep pushing them. But overall, this one turned out pretty good. So you just keep pushing it. I think this could turn into one of your stronger demo reel pieces if we kind of amp up some of the areas that aren't quite as clear and just really clarify those parts. All right, cool. I'm going to go ahead and close it here. That is all for class 1. or all of the people who turned in anything for class 1. So I'm going to start a new video for class 2, but please watch all of those as well, even if you're not in class 2. I'd really think it's a good idea to see as much of this feedback as you can. So I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.